Now, keeping things moving speedily along. Spanning the past, present, and future, I'd like to welcome on stage Dr. Brian Pierce, who's the Director of the Innovation Office at DARPA, and he'll be interviewed by our very own Khari Johnson from VentureBeat. Please welcome him to the stage.
Geek and me's pretty, am I on? Hello? Geek and me is pretty excited about this conversation. Nice to meet you. So, I mean, if we could just begin with unpacking what is DARPA, and I understand this isn't your first time there. What brought you back?
Well, DARPA is, of course, quite a stimulating place, and it was an opportunity to really, I'd say, learn a whole new area for me. I'd been in a different office at DARPA when I was there from 2005 to 2010, and I came back in 2014 because of the excitement of these areas, such as how we phrase symbiosis, human-machine partnership, where we really place AI as an enabler of this partnership, cyber, and then, of course, analytics, which, of course, has been a topic here today. I think for the benefit of the group, it's worth just probably saying a little bit about DARPA, because it is a rather interesting place and isn't so well known. It is an acronym. It stands for Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency. It's located in Washington, D.C. The D, I always like to look at as a way to keep us focused on the mission of national security. And whereas the P in DARPA for projects sort of centered on the development of breakthrough technologies that really help support and further the mission. Now, breakthrough to DARPA is really assessing the current edge of the art around the world and then striving to go 10 times beyond it. Now, that's always a difficult task of trying to do that assessment, but that's an important element for us to project further. We're not a general R&D organization doing open-ended discovery. We are project-focused. And I think it's important the composition of DARPA is really about 100 program managers that with a diversity of scientific technical backgrounds. And they come from companies, universities, other parts of the government. Stay at DARPA for only 4 to 5 years to start and manage programs with what we hope to be a revolutionary impact. Now, it's important to notice that this is a 20–25% annual turnover rate in PMs, which we think is very fundamental to DARPA's success in pursuing new ideas in terms of moving with the times and the like. It's important to note that DARPA has no laboratories or no infrastructure. And so the bulk of its $3 billion a year annual budget goes outside of DARPA in the form of R&D contracts that are awarded in a competitive manner through solicitation of proposals.
You mentioned the PMs, but how many people total are at DARPA?
Well, it's one building in Arlington, Virginia. It houses probably close to 1,000. So because with each PM, they sort of run it like an independent, I wouldn't quite say business, but they're a team. And they have contractors who support them. But from actually the core, it's about 100 program managers with people like myself who are the director of the office. So it's a very flat organization in that respect.
And can you talk a little bit more about the $2 billion initiative you just launched?
Sure. I think many of you may have heard it. It's called AI Next. And what we're doing is investing $2 billion over the next 5 years to really further applications of AI, again, complementary to what's going on in the commercial industrial sector, as well as looking more deeply at the foundations of AI. You know, one thing we recognize is that many of the algorithms used today in machine learning are really the result of work done a couple decades ago. So what's next after that? We do view AI as 3 waves, the first wave being handcrafted knowledge, expert systems, role-based systems. Second wave, of course, very much the topic here is machine learning. And then the third wave is this aspect, what we call contextual reasoning, which is trying to really move more up in terms of more human-like intelligence, certainly nothing approaching general intelligence, but how do we bring in, for example, our use of common sense when we encounter new situations? We'd like to get away from having to involve sort of enormous amounts of data to train functions like deep neural networks. So AI Next is encompassing that. Part of it, you may have heard, is AI exploration, or AIE. And that's really focused at very short studies or efforts, total about 18 months, and a top sort of budget of like $1 million. And the intent there is to rapidly roll those out. We just have recently one like the physics and AI that received about 100-odd proposals. So we actually, due to its tremendous response, we upped the total amount of awards given to those programs. So that's a little sample.
I mean, can we go back a little bit? I'm thinking of, you know, who are the, I associate DARPA with, you know, thinking generally about a decade ahead on most things, but what are some of the, you know, different initiatives that, you know, that I think have earned you that reputation? I'm thinking of like the Autonomous Vehicles Challenge and History of Siri and working with companies like SpaceX or...
Well, absolutely. I think if you look at the case of self-driving vehicles, I would say DARPA played an important role in advancing that technology, and of course central to it was machine learning AI. This was roughly, well, actually over 10 years ago. This was during the period of 2004 to 2007, where DARPA had its two grand challenges and then the urban challenge. And I would say pretty much all the individuals, or a good number of them, who are leading self-driving vehicle efforts today participated in those challenges. For example, Sebastian Thrun, who way later went to Google, he led Stanford's team that won the second grand challenge. The first one was a failure. No vehicle got further than a few miles. But it was remarkable a little more than a year later how you had 5 vehicles actually complete a 132-mile course in the Nevada desert. So that's right. Self-driving vehicles over 10 years ago. Siri, which was the result of an effort by one of the performers on a program called Personalized Assistant That Learns. That's, again, over 10 years ago. SRI then went forward with that voice recognition technology, made a pitch to Steve Jobs, and that was quite a home run from one perspective. It was an underlying sort of a whole comprehensive set of technologies tied to applications of AI. So those two certainly stand out. There's the DARPA Robotics Challenge, which occurred, I think, 2015. That was more, maybe not so explicit autonomous behavior, it was more of a local autonomy where you had teleoperated systems. And then most recently, well, relatively recently in 2016, we had a Cyber Grand Challenge, which was looking at the question of software-based cyber reasoning systems that actually went head-to-head in the world's first machine versus machine cyber competition at DEF CON in Las Vegas. So these are all examples.
So I'm thinking of common sense AI and the work that's going into that. Can you tell me why a little bit more about it? But why do you think that matters, and how that has any sort of connection with what are these next big steps in AI that get us into the next 10 years?
Yeah, it could be motivated by a couple of examples. And it's not to say that who knows how well some of the current technology might address it. But if you take today, you could show you could develop a classifier that could identify a number of objects in an image. Let's take, for example, an image of a cat sitting on a suitcase. It could identify the cat, it could identify the suitcase. If you ask the question, can the cat fit inside the suitcase? You're not going to get an answer there. Now, we, as human beings, we have a concept of a reasoning about the physical world, about a concept that objects occupy volume space. They aren't just these 2D collection of pixels. So that's an element we would consider of you're bringing in that prior knowledge and context. Or another example has been shown. There's a stack of fruit, say oranges, at a supermarket. We know if we're trying to be nice, which one to pick. If we're trying to create disruption, we'll pick the one at the bottom and see them all tumble down. So how do we kind of get to this, achieve this type of capability? Children acquire this quite well, and it's been well documented. And so one inspiration as to why we think maybe there's new insight here is there's very extensive work in the development of cognition in children and human beings. Can those serve as some inspiration of how we might go about approaching it with machines?
And something we had talked about a little bit earlier was this idea of, I can't recall who it was at Berkeley, but
oh yeah,
stop sign and changing you can toss some stickers on a stop sign and fool computer vision with that. It brought to mind the idea of just how brittle some models can be. Are there some that you think of as more robust? I mean, obviously the data is what matters, but that are more robust or further along and less prone to running into, well, frankly, some sort of brittle potential to fall apart or things wrong?
So I would say, so to recount, it's work by Dawn Song at Berkeley and paper she wrote, or her group, where they were able to look at a deep neural network and the fact that its understanding of it and how they could place black and white stickers in particular positions on a stop sign that resulted in that stop sign being misinterpreted by the classifier as a 45-mile-per-hour speed limit. So that's one of concern when you put it in the context of the kind of applications that we support in terms of national defense. And so these have, decisions have consequences. And of course, what's intriguing, that a misinterpretation actually persisted even as the vehicle approached the sign. So instead of braking, it could accelerate, all kinds of concerns. One thing we're doing to help address that, and this comes down to really establishing trust, or building trust of the human in the machine, is a program that we've have ongoing for several months now called Explainable AI, and where we really want to develop a new generation of machine learning techniques that provide a rationale that explains conclusions reached by the system. So in this case, if we were able to test the system, it could tell us why did it think that that was a 45-mile-per-hour speed limit. And in so doing, maybe can help start to understand the bounds of the system, which then can better inform the human user. And all these aspects then when it comes down to recommendations, decisions, and actions. So that's, I think, a step in that direction. We have one thing interesting for DARPA is we of course, have always been very technical focused. We've also understand because of this human-machine interaction, we need to bring into account what we call the psychology of explanation. And actually one of the technical areas for that particular program is looking at that. How do we better understand what does it mean to explain in the context of a human-machine interaction? So that would be one, and I would say also the common sense program. We could bring this to bear as well to make more robust the system.
And then I had one more question that I wanted to open it up to the audience and see if anybody had any questions for you. But I'm curious, because of the amount of time that you've spent in this space, if there are any applications that you've seen. I know you focus on defense, but that could impact the business world, you think, going forward, some major leaps that have happened, perhaps since the recent revamp of deep learning that you see on the horizon?
Well, I think probably of interest to the group would be is this aspect of can we get away with learning with fewer labels, with less labels? If to go to greater accuracy on these deep neural networks, you often see the need for billions or a billion items labeled. That's expensive. And sometimes you even are challenged from the fact where in the kind of application space that we work in, you may not even have as many as, like enormous number of cat videos or cat images. So how can one come about to achieve that? I know that's of general interest. We, of course, are very, we would like to address that, and we're kicking off a program to achieve that objective. I think it's important to note is that we have done things in the past that I would say more foundational, that would be of general interest and can be leveraged for a number of applications. For us, that's a success. We have been active in open source. One of our programs called XData, which is very explicitly an open stack of data analytical tools and techniques, is available through the DARPA Open Catalog, and you can go to GitHub and download a variety of capabilities. One notable success for it is our support of the Spark capability that, of course, has been quite widely used and disseminated.
Journalists are never telling the truth when they say that was the last question. One more.
Okay.
I'm curious, sort of along the same lines, but given your time in sort of in this space of on the edge innovation, are there any forms of technology that you've come across that like people have they never associate it with DARPA, but it's like we totally were involved with that.
Well, you may not be aware that MEMS was a major DARPA initiative. Of course, that's in our smartphones and for accelerometers and the like.
Yeah.
Gallium arsenide technology that we use is still today even the power of silicon in our phones as an RF power amplifier. Because of its efficiency, it extends battery life.
Yeah.
That may not be so well known. It's pretty buried down there.
I mean, cool.
Yeah, it's quite a range. GPS, the miniaturization, the first attempt at miniaturization. This goes further back, but from these rack-mounted units. Neuroprosthetic limbs. That was driven by the concern over amputees coming back from conflict. So, yeah, it's an interesting collection.
Yeah. Questions from the audience? Please wait for the microphone. Sure.
Brian, thank you. So we're living in a relatively uncharted times, right? So Regina Dugan, who was the director of DARPA, has gone on to Google, and now she's at F8 Labs, and she's publicly stated that she's modeling F8 Labs after DARPA. And yet we're seeing, I think maybe for the first time in my memory, employees of some of the largest research, commercial research institutions in the world, whether it be Google or Facebook. The employees of those firms are making a lot of noise about not wanting to be a part of a company or a culture that supports these initiatives, even though most of the money today is going toward the commercial sector, given the austerity of government funding. So can you comment a little bit about the impact that will have on your efforts as the Director of Innovation when some of the greatest research institutions in America may be opting out for quote-unquote moral reasons?
We respect every company and entity. I think there's a very rich base of capability across the United States that we haven't seen has been impinge upon that. We tend to work a lot directly with universities, small companies. It actually has not turned to be an issue, even worldwide, right? We'll have entities from outside the United States on our fundamental research programs. So I haven't seen it as an impingement, and I think it's just a reflection of the depth and richness of the community, of the ecosystem, personally. Yeah.
For the record, Regina Dugan left,
she left
about a year ago.
Yeah, thank you.
How would you compare the U.S. government's efforts in AI research with those of the Chinese government, whether that's DARPA or other entities that get funding here in the U.S.?
Well, first of all, I don't probably have the deep insight in terms of what we see occurring in China or elsewhere in the world. We see, of course, China, what I read, like you, in the press, their use of access to large amounts of data for face recognition technology. I always like to step back, and when I look at a technology, and this issue that gets brought up in terms of, well, who's leading when and where, a technology by itself does not really change things. It's how we use it. I mean, take silicon transistors is the way I always like to phrase it. It was that in itself did not change the world, but then, of course, how we incorporate it into various types of systems, the systems engineering, and then addressing all the so-called illities, affordability, installability, security. So I think as long as the United States is certainly active, and like we are as DARPA, we try to, again, tailor our programs such that we are addressing needs and objectives that are complementary to what we see in industry. I mean, for example, we were very heavy in natural language processing in the more classic sense of statistical approaches to language translation. We have stopped doing that, and now we're looking at challenges presented by low resource languages, languages that don't have the textual corpora to be able to train in the classic sense. So how do we maybe go back to language universals and other types of approaches? So I think, so that's my best answer for you. Yeah.
And we have time for one more.
Can you comment on DARPA's view of AR and VR in terms of how they link to AI?
I'm sorry, the first part?
Augmented reality and virtual reality. How they link to AI. What is DARPA's view on that?
There's a number, so DARPA expresses itself through its programs, Obviously, if there is a way we can help with some of these generative adversarial networks, could be beneficial in the combination with virtual reality. One area we are looking at is this concern over the manipulation of media, of images, videos. We have a program called Media Forensics. And the intent there is, you want to take advantage of all the images and videos that are uploaded, I guess like 2 billion daily to social media. We'd like to be able to make a determination of what has been manipulated. So there we do apply certain machine learning techniques. It's an ongoing sort of interaction because we've seen that capability really increase in sophistication over the years. That would be one. It's not quite explicitly virtual reality, but to some extent it sort of gets a little in that. But I'd say right now in my office, we don't have explicitly a program looking at AI for augmented reality or virtual reality. Not to say that it isn't there, but we think there's a lot of work being done outside. Yeah.
It's looking at the blinking in the eyes, right, on the deepfake detection with the
well, actually what they're looking at there is, so when you get to deepfakes or how they're being able to take media and turn the one person who's in the subject of the media into more like a puppet.
Right.
In terms of audioly and visually. They'll look at the synchronization of the lips, as an example, with the soundtrack, something that would be imperceptible to human beings, but AI, again, machine learning can really help along
pick
those
up that flicker.
Yeah, but it's sort of like Blink, is what you're saying.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, thank you. Thanks for your time.